Today we're going to take a look at the Age of Revolution, which is a time period roughly between 1750 and 1850 where there are many revolutions in the Atlantic world. We'll see the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, and then revolutions popping up throughout Latin America that will lead to those regions becoming their own countries. One thing, though, before we go into these revolutions that I want to take a look at is the stages of revolution. There are kind of four basic stages of revolution that we can look at. We can see the incubation stage. This is kind of the stage of what sets the ideas up for a revolution to occur. And at this time, we're going to be talking about the Enlightenment. We have those ideas from John Locke, Thomas Hobbes, Montesquieu, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, all these great thinkers telling people that, hey, the government should be maybe a little bit more democratic, that people have certain rights, that there's a contract between people and their government, and that if they don't agree with what's going on with the government, they have the right to overthrow it. And so those ideas are planted during the Enlightenment, which is going on at this time. Then you have the symptomatic stages, which is where you have the beginnings of the revolution. You have the first problems rise up between the leaders and the common people that will eventually lead to them revolting. Then you have the crisis stage where it becomes, okay, we're going to revolt now. You've gone a step too far. We're going to try to change the government that we have. And then that goes on through the revolution. And then after the revolution ends, could be a short time, could be a very long time, as we'll see with the French Revolution. It'll stop and things will slowly start to recover and go out of the turmoil, and either a new government will be set up like we'll see in all these, or it could be back to the norm if the ruling party stays in power. So we're going to go through the four major revolutions here, and we're going to start with the first of these revolutions of the American Revolution. With all these revolutions that we're going to look at, though, they're going to be very, very brief. You're going to need to get a lot more details from the text. But this is just a little bit of a supplement to that, making sure you're getting the main points here. So, first off, the American Revolution starts before 1776 with our Declaration of Independence. Starts way back, actually, in the French and Indian War, where the British come in to help protect the United States against the French and Indians who are starting to attack the colony's borders. And the British will come in and actually win. And although it's a great victory, it was a very, very expensive war. And when you have expensive wars, you need to raise taxes to pay for the debts that you incurred. And so, to fix this problem, the British decide to finally raise taxes against the colonists, which they had not done before. In the 200 or so years of the colonies being run by the British, there were no direct taxes. So this is something that the colonists were not used to. They were used to being autonomous, running themselves, taxing themselves, giving money to Britain with how they felt necessary, and they didn't like this. And so they said, you know what, you're not representing us in Parliament. We need a voice. If you give us a voice, we will listen to you, maybe. And so they argue for that. You have the whole quote of no taxation without representation, and so people protest all the new taxes, such as the Stamp Act, the Sugar Act, the Tea Act, all those taxes that Britain tries to impose, and they protest all of them, even the Tea Act, which really was a tax making tea cheaper, but undercut our smuggling founding fathers. Not to bash them at all, but they weren't necessarily the best guys. They did some illegal things. Couple like Samuel Adams and John Hancock were big smugglers and bringing in tea and other goods that weren't supposed to be brought in into the country around the British taxes, and so they didn't want to lose their business there, and so we have the Boston Tea Party with many other tea parties throughout the colonies, and that kind of brings it to the final step where Britain starts to hammer it down, and the colonists go, okay, this is too much. And we have an incident in Lexington and Concord with the first shots being fired, and then a year after that we have the Declaration of Independence being signed and then sent over to Britain saying we're going to fight you for our freedom, and we fight for several years against the British and eventually win our independence. With this independence, the 13 colonies become the first successful colonial revolution, and they are the first really democratic government, enlightenment, um, enlightenment style of government or envisioned government, where it's democratic. There are checks and balances in the government. The leaders are elected, but not everyone has a say. You kind of keep it in the eyes of the educated, the wealthier citizens. But everyone has liberties, rights that are given to them and based in a constitution, and everyone is supposed to be equal in the law as long as, in this case, you are male and property owner, and you get everything's equal. If you're not one of those, a lady, a minority, you're an Indian, whatever it may be, unfortunately, until more modern times, you will not have equality in the United States. But this is the start. This is the most democratic form of government that we will have since the Roman Republic, and even before that, with the city of Athens back in ancient Greece. Now, the American Revolution, one of its other effects is it will lead to the French Revolution happening. Um, in France, you have a leader named Louis XVI, and he's got his queen wife, Marie Antoinette, and they are great monarchs. Well, maybe not great monarchs. They're actually pretty bad monarchs, but they try to make themselves look great. They have all these fashionable clothes, throw extravagant parties, and that doesn't really help your situation when you don't have a lot of money. And especially when you spend a lot of money helping the Americans fight the Revolutionary War to beat up the British. They don't have any money. And so to raise money, they have to raise taxes on the people. And to do this, Louis XVI calls on this institution called the Estates General, which brings in a group of the people from three estates. The first estate being the nobles, second estate being the church, third estate being the commoners. It brings them in to come and vote and decide on controversial governmental issues. Now, this sounds like a great idea, but this is actually something the French hadn't done for a long time because the monarchs just decided they were going to do what they wanted to do, especially under Louis XIV, who was the most powerful monarch probably of Europe during this time. Um, and so this just shows Louis XVI is not the best ruler, and at the same time that they're going to try to raise taxes on people, the economy is very poor. There is no food, or the food is very expensive, and the common people can't afford it. And now they're having new taxes thrown on them because the only people that will have taxes raised on them are the poor, the third estate, which is 98% of the population, because the 2% that's in the church and the nobles have more votes than the third estate, and so they vote to not have taxes raised on them, but raise them on the poor, or threaten to raise them on the poor. And so what happens is the third estate breaks away, and they will set up the General Assembly and claim that they are the actual voice of the French government. And will try to set up a constitutional monarchy, but that doesn't really work. What happens here is the Bastille, which is a symbol of the king, will be stormed on July 14th, 1789. It's stormed on July 14th, 1789, and this is something known as Bastille Day in France. This is kind of like their 4th of July that we have. And what happens is they go and tear down this prison that's a symbol of the king's power in the middle of Paris. And this starts really a spread of violence throughout the revolution. They kill all the guards and free the prisoners. Not that there were many prisoners in there, but they kill the guards and tear it down all the way and make it just rubble. So you can't even go see the Bastille anymore. Then what happens is the king is then thrown into kind of house arrest, and then he tries to escape. He's not able to escape, which really upsets the French citizens, and so they get really, really mad. And what happens is Robespierre kind of starts leading the National Assembly, and we'll set up a council will be set up on public safety. And it's kind of ironic that it's called the Council of Public Safety because they end up going around and killing about 15 to 50,000 of their own citizens for kind of being questionable on whether they support the revolution or not. And so Robespierre, a guy named Maximilien Robespierre, kind of leads this movement, and um, he'll they'll order the death of Louis XVI by the guillotine. His wife Marie Antoinette will also be taken by the guillotine, and this will go on for roughly a year until people go, "Oh, this is not maybe the best idea. This isn't showing what we're trying to gain, which is liberty, equality, and fraternity." Fraternity meaning nationalism, and so bringing France, making France as best as it can be. They realize it kind of doesn't match up, and they stop it when Robespierre tries to kill more people, and they say, you know what, we're done, and they put Robespierre under the guillotine, and that kind of ends the Reign of Terror, but that doesn't stop the whole problem with the French Revolution. It's still out of control, still a little corrupt, still can't really run the country very, very well. And so France is still in turmoil. Throughout this time of the Reign of Terror and as the revolution goes on, European nations are coming in and attacking, either trying to reinstate Louis XVI before he gets his head chopped off, or trying to come in and punish and take over territory from France. One thing that this does, though, is it kind of backfires on the rest of Europe, because what will happen is a guy named Napoleon Bonaparte will rise the ranks in the French army and become the leader of France. He'll take it over and set up his own imperial government. But before that happens, you have some great things happen in France. You have the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which makes all men equal, lays out liberties similar to what we have, what you might see in the Declaration of Independence, and then also what you see in our 10 amendments to the Constitution in the United States. France also, during the time, even with the Reign of Terror, up until Napoleon takes over, will be the first really democratic country in Europe. They have a republic. It allows all men to vote, and it's a great idea, and it should work in theory, but unfortunately for France, with how the revolution went, it didn't work out too well. It just caused more chaos because people were trying to gain power and killing each other and doing terrible things like that. So what eventually happens is Napoleon Bonaparte uses military power, has a coup d'etat, which is a takeover by force, and sets up an imperial government that brings stability to France, levels things out, but is going to lead to a few years of war between France and everyone else in Europe. But Napoleon does some great things, as we saw the other day, like the Napoleonic Code. What else? Revolutionizing the education system in France, making sure that everyone gets bread, that it doesn't go too high, and tries to prevent the problems that caused Louis XVI from getting his head chopped off from happening under his reign. So that leads to Napoleon Bonaparte. And all these ideas and the takeover by Napoleon Bonaparte will lead to the Haitian Revolution. The Haitian Revolution is actually happening during the French Revolution. And what Haiti was before was actually a colony called Saint-Domingue. And it was the wealthiest French sugar colony and one of the wealthiest colonies in the Americas. They were a major sugar producer, and they had a lot of slaves because, if you remember, the plantation process is not very easy, especially when growing sugar. And so these slaves hear all these great stories about, or hear all this great news from France about fraternity, liberty, equality, and they go, hey, we shouldn't be in the situation that we're in right now. We should be living it up like they are. We should have equality. We should not be slaves. There's no reason for slavery. And so they rise up. At the same time, there are other French citizens in Saint-Domingue or Haiti that are calling for the same things. Unfortunately, the slaves outnumber the whites and the mulattoes. And what happens is these slaves will rise up and kill or wipe a lot of them out. Some will flee. Others will stay there, but they will lose all their rights after this revolution ends. But they push on and bring and fight through. They fight off. They'll fight off the French army. They'll fight off foreign invaders that were trying to take over the colony and make it their own. like the British, the Spanish, all the major powers, and then they'll then fight off the French again and eventually get their independence. Um, the only problem with this is, well, actually, let's take a step back. The successes here are this becomes the first successful slave revolt and only really successful slave revolt in all of history. And it would be really nice if this was a nice story because it inspires all the slaves, or many slaves throughout the New World, to question what they're doing, and it really puts white slave owners at in a crux, and they're worried about slave revolts, and so it leads to some slave revolts, but those aren't successful. But it kind of changes things around. The only problem for Haiti is that they don't get to keep the status of this great, wealthy colony. Instead, they move away from plantation systems and sugar plantations. Instead, divide up the land and spread it out more or less equally, or at least try to give land to the majority of the population of former slaves. By going to small-scale farming and not growing sugar, you don't make as much money. And then at the same time, France decides to lay what I would call reparations on the Haitians because they're now their independent colony, and France wants to get some money out of it. And Napoleon at the time needs money to fight all his wars, which is also why he will sell the Louisiana territory to the United States, because he needs money for his wars, and so he's trying to get money from the Haitians to pay for these wars. He's trying to get money for the Louisiana Purchase to keep funding his wars, and he realizes that it might not be a good thing to have colonies in the New World anyways, because they're a long way away and they're hard to control. So he gets rid of all his territory. France loses their territory in the Americas. But this really hurts Haiti because they continue to pay these reparations up until more modern times, up until the 1900s, until they fully paid them off of what they owed France. And to do this, they had to borrow more money to pay all that off. So it took them a very, very long time to pay all of that off successfully. And that's why, if you look at Haiti today, they are still a very, very poor country, unfortunately. And you can see what's happened in recent years, last 5, 10 years, of hurricanes wiping through there, wiping things out, causing major mudslides and lots of people to die. The earthquake that happened there a few years ago. So lots of they aren't able to handle natural disasters as many other countries are in that area, especially if you look just on the other side of the island, because you have Haiti on one side and then you have the Dominican Republic on the other. The Dominican Republic handles these situations a lot better because it was left off when it got its independence in a much better state than what Haiti was left in, or what Haiti eventually kind of ended up in with the reparations and smaller scale farming. But now, one other thing that Haiti will do is the ideas from Haiti, those ideas of the French Revolution, of the American Revolution, of the Enlightenment, will continue and spread to the continental Latin America, South America, Mesoamerica, and lead to revolutions there to kick the Spanish and the Portuguese out of those countries. Within these countries, if you remember, or these colonies, they're led by the Creoles, which are the white citizens that are that were born in their colony, but they are pretty much 100% Spanish, or close to 100% Spanish. And so they resent Spain controlling them. They're like, we're our own people. We're here in the Americas. You don't really have much control over us. We don't want to be a part of you and pay all these taxes and everything else that you expect us to pay. And so they try to break away by kind of pushing against them. And then what's going to eventually happen is Napoleon really accelerates the process, because he goes in and conquers Portugal and conquers Spain. And Spain gets caught up in turmoil of a civil war fighting, maybe not a civil war, but a resistance struggle fighting Napoleon. And so they say, we're not going to follow Napoleon's brother, I believe it was Joseph. We're not going to follow him. He's not our rightful king. And we're definitely not going to follow the Spanish king when he gets back here. So they start breaking away and fighting against the Spanish armies that are there, and any other armies that come in to try to retake the territory. The one thing these Creoles need to do, though, during this time is to bring the natives in, because the Creoles are not a huge population. and the natives want to get their freedom and rights. They want to be equal with everyone else. And so they promise them rights, but as any good politician does, they promise more than they actually give. And so what will happen here is they will help fight for the Creoles and help gain the independence for these colonies. As you can see here, kind of the dates of when they gained their freedom. But most of Central America and South America is free by 1830 or so. But the Native Americans, the natives there, will not gain all the rights they were kind of promised and will not really be equal. They'll gain some more rights than they had before, but it's not 100% of what they were looking for. They kind of get hosed a little bit. And these governments don't necessarily become the best governments. The governments weren't able to unite as in the 13 colonies and bringing the 13 states, or making the 13 colonies into 13 states and making that one country. That doesn't happen. The people are a little too diverse here, especially when we talk about Peru with the Incan civilization, Mesoamerica with the Aztecs and the Mayas and the Olmecs and all that heritage there. So they're very divided from region to region, and it's difficult terrain to go through of mountains and thick rainforests. So with the distances, with the travels, communications, all that stuff, it's hard to unite all of them and make them one giant country. And so instead they become several different countries like Argentina, Chile, Peru, Colombia, Nicaragua, El Salvador, Panama, which is kind of controlled by Colombia up until more modern times, and Mexico, Brazil. All these kind of become their own countries. Um, Although they have some similar cultures, they all kind of are independent just because of how um, things worked out. They couldn't connect all of them. And so um, they will gain their independence. They will give some freedoms to the natives, but not fully to the natives. And they will try to set up a democratic style of government, just like Haiti and France and the United States set up. But these aren't really strong republics. They don't do a great job. They're corrupt. They'll lead to dictators. Just not an overall good situation. So what happens is the power of Latin America, which was very, very strong early on. If you remember looking back at the silk trade and how, or not silk, sorry, silver trade, and then all the resources that were pumped in and taken out by the Spanish and Portuguese, that kind of wanes and disappears because of corruption and lack of good leadership, lack of good governing. And so what happens is um, Latin America starts to fall, and they'll become kind of uh, they will revert to the position that the northern colonies in North America were in when the colonies first started. Everyone wanted the South American colonies. No one wanted the North American colonies, which is why the British and the French were able to take their territory there. But now the roles switch, and now everyone wants kind of North America because of all the great wealth and everything else that's in North America and how they're running things and the stability. While in South America and Mesoamerica it dips and it goes down. And now we can start to see today about 150 or roughly 150 years, even more than that now going to modern times. Some of these areas finally starting to rebound and become more powerful and prosperous nations. It's taken some longer. Some are still struggling. Others are in the process there. And so that kind of ends this. Revolutions don't stop. There's still more influence or more revolutions that will happen. Um, if we look at the end of the time period that we're going to look up until 1900, the Cubans will finally start to revolt against Spain and try to get their independence, and they'll get that when the United States comes in and helps. So the revolutions don't stop here. They still inspire later ones, but after 1830 it kind of slows down a lot. And a lot more of the focus goes to out of the New World for Europe anyways, to looking at Africa and dividing up Southeast Asia, South Asia, and East Asia, and trying to get influence there. And the New World kind of gets left alone except for kind of the Caribbean islands, which many are still controlled by the Europeans.